So a lot of people know that I spend maybe too much time online, social media, whether it's Twitter or Blue Sky. And I came across a tweet recently that made me laugh. And it comes from a Sam C. Ehrlich, who happens to be an assistant professor at the Boise State School of Business and Economics, also a lawyer. And he says, finally ready to announce my winter break project that some of you already know about. I've created a website to keep track of all of the court cases shaping college sports, introducing the College Sports Litigation Tracker. My response to that was, you're going to have to hire a staff. Says Sam Ehrlich, assistant professor at Boise State, is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. Do you have an Indeed account that you can go out and find people to help you cull all of these lawsuits? What's our number at right now?
It's a lot. It is a lot right now. I think we're probably about 50 right now, because, I mean, I did not, when I started the website, and thank you so much for having me on the show, by the way. When I started the website, I did not anticipate the absolute flood of eligibility lawsuits that have happened. I figured I'd be tracking the House case. I figured I'd be tracking kind of, some of the ripple effects from that. But then when Diego Pavia won his lawsuit back in December, and then 29 other lawsuits were filed along the same lines, I thought, oh man, maybe I do need to take Adam's advice and get a staff.
I don't know if you're hiring or not, but you can follow him on Twitter at Sam C. Ehrlich. By the way, Diego Pavia is the Vanderbilt quarterback who spent a bunch of, I think, time at JUCO, right? Before ultimately getting to Vanderbilt. Tons of things. First of all, hope you have enough bandwidth. So I'm going to broad brush this. Do you have a favorite of the lawsuits that have been filed?
I think I do. And actually, in relative your neck of the woods, there's one that was filed by a tennis player,
yes.
Reese Brantmeyer. The UNC tennis player. She later added Texas tennis player Maya Joint to her case as well. And this case is just absolutely fascinating. This case is so incredibly interesting because it's not a football player. It's not a basketball player. It's not someone in one of these high-revenue sports, but they're attacking this rule that, to me, makes absolutely no sense in the NIL era. It makes absolutely no sense now that we're doing revenue sharing. It's the rule, for those unfamiliar, it's the rule that says that tennis players and other athletes, though they're really just restricting it to tennis players right now, make money on outside competition. So if, Miss Brantmeyer were to compete in the U.S. Open, for example, she would only be limited if she won the U.S. Open. She'd only be limited in terms of prize money to the expenses that she had to pay to actually compete in the event. They're reasonable expenses, and her complaint, going through it, the NCAA has just been so very hardline on it. They required her to pay for half a hotel room because her mom stayed with her. Just some really ridiculous stuff in a rule that it's really questionable why the NCAA is even enforcing it in this day and age.
Sam Ehrlich is joining us here in the Adam Gold Show. I had that written down because this whole case, I've been talking about this for a while, because it actually started, I think it's class action now as well, but it started with bringing other sports into the equation, even though it probably didn't need to, because we have, college players compete in the U.S. Open in golf and the U.S. Open in tennis. We had a college player win a PGA Tour event last year, Nick Dunlap, who was at Alabama, and had to choose between accepting the prize money and turning professional or staying an amateur, letting the prize money sit there, but still, I guess, gathering in a lot of the perks that come with winning a tournament. But it doesn't make any sense, and I've asked this question on Twitter. I've asked this question on the show. If you can get $100,000 for putting a Nike swoosh on your tennis shirt during the U.S. Open from Nike, why can't you also take the prize money that comes with advancing? Because she She, I think, advanced in the U.S. Open maybe around a few years ago. That's where this whole thing started. She is scheduled to play in it again. So she's going to play, I believe she starts in the main draw next week. So it doesn't make any sense, you say, in the NIL era, you can earn endorsement money from playing in these events, but you can't take prize money. That makes zero sense. It almost seems to me like the NCAA is caught between the way they used to be and the way they have to be, and they can't quite get all the way there.
I think that's a perfect way of putting it. And I think that's exactly what's going on here, where they're very adamant in saying that athletes cannot be paid to play. They cannot be paid for athletic performance. They cannot be paid for wins and losses. And that all the rules and all the rule changes still align with that. Except when you look at the House settlement, when you look at revenue sharing, when you look at the fact that when you look at collectives over the past 4 years, yes, there's some, kind of really kind of questionable ties to some kind of NIL deal where maybe you're doing a tweet or an Instagram post for $100,000. And it's like, okay, well, that's why we have this clearinghouse that's going after, whether it's a valid business purpose or whether it's a reasonable range of compensation for the particular services. But even if you look at revenue sharing, and that's not something controlled by the clearinghouse, it is so very clearly pay for play. It is so clearly based on pay for play. So they're holding on to this amateurism ideology. They're holding on to this idea that college athletes are still amateurs, but the reality just doesn't reflect that anymore. And I think that's probably how it's going to play out in the Brandmeier case as well.
So you talk about the College Sports Clearinghouse, which is, or commission, I don't even know what it's called, which is going to determine whether or not money you get from a collective is for a legitimate business purpose. It's got to be for a for-profit business. I am curious. I don't even know if this case has come up yet, but is there a workaround where the university, where the collective could say, all right, these players are doing, posts on behalf of the athletic department, which is a for-profit entity, although technically I guess it isn't, and just can, be a representative of the athletic department, because there are, I don't know who's even going to make these determinations. They're certainly going to be random, aren't they?
It kind of, it really kind of is, just because the Deloitte algorithm that's being used by the College Sports Commission to determine this reasonable range of compensation is so incredibly opaque. And the rules regarding whether it's a valid business purpose are very up in the air and very, very undetermined right now. I mean, they just came out a few weeks ago saying no collectives in general, just,
right.
Based on what a collective is, it can't count as a valid business purpose. And then they had to reverse it because the House class council, threatened to sue them over it. So, I think we're still trying to figure out a lot of that, but really there's kind of a distinction here. And I think for your hypothetical for, having it based on kind of promoting the university, that would probably count towards the $20.5 million cap. That's how the CSC would see it, because you're performing services for the university. But I think there's a lot here that we still have yet to determine. I think if it, one thing that they said regarding collectives is if that the collective, kind of facilitates a deal for the athlete on behalf of another entity, that one that has a valid business purpose, that's okay. So trying to figure out the contours of that, we're still very new on this. We're just over a month into this new era. I think we still have a long way to go in figuring that out.
I'm going to put a pin in the word cap because I want to get back to that with our next line. But I am curious. Let's just say there's a sub shop in the college town that donates some money to a collective. Does the collective, who then turns around and pays an athlete, let's just say $250,000, and this athlete is going to do some social media posts or maybe does an autograph signing outside the sub shop, does it have to be identical to the money that was contributed by the sub shop, or can it be for anything?
I think the CSC and I would probably give very different answers on that. I think the College Sports Commission would say yes, and I would say we don't really know yet, and that's not something that's really outlined by the terms of the settlement. And it may be something that goes to an arbitrator if it's denied by the CSC, because they may be pushing the bounds of their authority a little bit. Again, still a lot that we have to figure out on this, and we'll see. I guess is the best answer for this.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. The NCAA, I think you'll agree on this, Sam. The NCAA didn't do a great job of policing pay for play, whether it was during the NIL era or before, when it was all under the table, underground, when these were all obvious violations because the athletes were not allowed to earn any money. Now let me get back to cap, because I am curious. I don't know if there's a category for this on collegesportslitigationtracker.com. How many of these lawsuits are antitrust in nature? Because putting a cap on earnings that isn't collectively bargained, isn't that antitrust problem?
It is. It is. And to answer your question about how many of the lawsuits are antitrust, I'd say probably more than half of them. There's a lot of federal lawsuits out there. There's some breach of contract lawsuits out there, but antitrust is by far the dominating force in college sports over the past probably about a decade at this point, ever since the O'Bannon case in 2015. But yeah, and I think you put it perfectly, because having a cap, as my friend and colleague Mark Edelman has put it, in fact, listened to a great presentation he did last week at a conference, a cap is still an antitrust violation. It doesn't matter whether you are paying them zero or assigning a cap of $0 as it was before,
right,
or $20.5 million or $500 million or $1 billion. It's still an antitrust violation if you have this cap, if it's not collectively bargained, which would give it this antitrust immunity.
Mark Edelman, by the way, okay, finish your answer. Finish your answer.
I was just going to say, the issue with athletes filing a lawsuit over this cap right now is that the House settlement does give the NCAA and the CSC some protection over this, because the athletes are giving up their right to sue over this, or at least pushing their ability to sue to arbitration or to the special master who's been assigned by Judge Wilkin in the Northern District of California to oversee these cases. But unlike with salary caps in the NFL or the NBA, we have collectives, we have third-party boosters, we have these third-party entities that are bound in no way by the House settlement. So it's only a matter of time, I think, before they file a lawsuit over this cap, and it'll be really interesting to see how that goes.
And it's an assumption that if an athlete goes to a school that has opted in, the athlete has also agreed to opt into these rules, much like the old assumption was that if you got a scholarship, you allowed yourself to be bound by the rules, as antiquated as they were, of amateurism. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Real quick, the executive order that was signed by the White House, which I believe was entitled Saving College Sports, not quite sure that's happened. How much does this also protect, or does it do basically nothing that hasn't been done already?
It's really up in the air right now. And I hate to keep defaulting to we'll see, but
see.
That's also kind of the answer here as well, because I see the executive order as more of a toolbox, more of a here's the tools that we're giving these various agencies, the Department of Education, the Federal Trade Commission, the National Labor Relations Board. We're setting them instructions, we're giving them instructions, we're telling them what to do in these particular situations. But until those agencies actually act, and if those agencies actually act, I think it's a critical part of it, if they don't just kind of just ignore it or kind of, have other priorities, because these agencies have very commonly shown that they have other priorities. For example, the Federal Trade Commission has had governing authority over sports agents in college sports for several years, and they've never done anything about it. So we'll see what happens with it. We'll see how hard President Trump and these agencies actually push on this. It does give them a lot of power. A lot of the power is very much kind of nuclear option type of territory, like taking funding away from schools.
Right.
But it's also questionable how much investigative authority they're going to have over this, how much they're actually going to be able to look into potential violations here. And also just the fact that the executive order is pretty vague in a lot of ways, where it's going to be very questionable of how much can actually be done in this space.
It just seems to me like they're just going to be like a bad offensive line and just kind of gum up the works and maybe just get run over slowly, just to kind of delay the process. I don't know. I agree with you. We'll see how this is going to work. Two very quick things. Collective bargaining would solve this problem, correct?
Hypothetically, yes, but there's a lot of barriers to get to collective bargaining.
Sure.
There are a lot of barriers here. For one, federal law does not allow public employees to bargain. It has to be done through state law, and a lot of states are very inconsistent about whether they allow public employees to bargain. And obviously, a lot of college athletes, if they were to be declared employees, would be public employees since they are at public schools. And there's also the fact that, well, to have collective bargaining, you have to have a union. You have to have athletes who want to bargain. And at this point, I don't even see why athletes would even want to bargain. Just keep filing lawsuits.
It's probably true. It's funny. I had a debate with Doug Gottlieb not that long ago about collective bargaining, and he goes, "Why would the athletes do it? They already get everything they want." I'm like, "It's for the schools, Doug. The schools want certainty. It would help them." He couldn't wrap his mind around the fact that it would work both ways. And you at Boise State, I'm going to guess, and this is the first time you and I have had a conversation, I'm going to guess that you're a football fan.
I think that's reasonable to say, definitely.
Do you think we're headed, maybe in the near future, to where football separates from all the other sports, and then they can legitimately just stop pretending that it's not pro sports and just be a minor league for the NFL?
I don't know if I'd quite term it as a minor league for the NFL, but maybe that's just my perception of like minor league baseball, for example, being very clearly inferior to Major League Baseball in a lot of ways. Though I do enjoy minor league baseball games quite a bit. I do think we're headed towards some kind of separation. I think it just has to happen where the rules that are being applied here and the challenges that are happening here, they're so football focused. The rules are so the NCAA has been trying to apply these rules across all the different sports, and it just doesn't really work. I mean, we just talked about the Brandmeier case, for example. And I think that's a really good example here of rules that work for football to a certain degree, and maybe work for tennis. Maybe the NCAA wants to apply it for tennis, but you look at what's happening in football right now, and it makes absolutely no sense. So I think for the NCAA to survive as an enforcement entity, to continue to do what they want to do in the sports that they really spend the majority of their time on, especially considering that they don't control FBS college football anymore. It's all controlled by the CFP. Maybe the NCAA needs to kind of just take what they have and cut off the limit at some point and allow football to kind of do its own thing and allow football to be its own thing and have its own rules. And maybe that's exactly what the College Sports Commission is kind of gearing us towards. Sam
Ehrlich, an assistant professor at Boise State and the man behind collegesportslitigationtracker.com. You're going to need more bandwidth. I've been looking through. You have broken down by category. There's Title IX cases. The Reese Brandmeier case is, I believe, the fifth one down from the top at the very top of the page. You and I are going to talk again as long as you'll allow it. I appreciate your time. Go Broncos, and maybe we'll just talk football one time.
That would be great. Yeah, anytime, Adam. Thanks so much for having me.